AI. As of early 2026, roughly 1 in 4 student loan borrowers with a payment currently due is delinquent. That number stood at 9% in 2019, and today it's approaching 25%. According to TransUnion, roughly 5.8 million federal student loan borrowers have been reported to the credit bureaus as 90 or more days past due just in spring of 2025. 7.9 million borrowers entered delinquency in the first 3 quarters of 2025 alone. A separate analysis found that throughout 2025, a borrower was defaulting on a federal student loan every 9 seconds. All day, every day. The total outstanding student loan balance in the United States right now sits at $1.84 trillion. It's the second largest category of consumer debt in the country, sitting only behind mortgages, larger than all credit card debt in America combined, larger than all auto loans combined. 44 million people hold some portion of that balance. And of the college graduates who finished their degrees within the last 5 years and entered the labor market they were told would reward them, 42.5% are currently working jobs that do not require a college degree at all. A warehouse floor supervisor with a bachelor's degree in communications, a barista earning $15 an hour with $47,000 in student loans, and a degree in sociology. Meanwhile, 23% of all bachelor's degree programs in the United States, nearly 1 in 4, produce graduates who, once costs and foregone income are factored in, would have been financially better off never enrolling in the first place. The gap between what those programs cost and what they actually return isn't small. It is, in many cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars. U.S. programmer employment fell 27.5% between 2023 and 2025. Entry-level job postings across white-collar industries declined approximately 35% between January 2023 and mid-2025. Only 30% of the class of 2025 secured full-time employment in their field of study, down from 41% for the class that graduated just 1 year before them. A new technology wave eliminating the precise entry-level jobs that 4-year degrees were supposed to guarantee.
Major companies like Microsoft, Walmart, and Business Insider are laying off employees amid the rise of artificial intelligence.
When AI gets super intelligent, it might just replace us.
And a generation of parents still telling their 17-year-olds that any college, at any price, studying anything is better than not going at all. This is the story of how the United States built one of the most expensive educational systems in the world, why it worked for decades, who is failing now, and what the math actually shows when nobody is telling you what conclusion to reach first. Before 1944, college in the United States was something that fewer than 5% of the population ever experienced. Harvard was founded in 1636, William and Mary in 1693, Yale in 1701. For most of their first 2 centuries, those institutions served as a narrow slice of American society: the clergy, the wealthy, and the politically connected. By 1870, total post-secondary enrollment across the entire country was 63,000 students. The nation had roughly 40 million people at the time. So that works out to less than 2 students in college for every 1,000 Americans living. The first structural expansion of higher education came through the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862, signed by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. The federal government distributed over 17.4 million acres of federal land to individual states, requiring that the proceeds fund colleges focused on agriculture, engineering, and military science. The legislation created 48 institutions almost immediately. A second Morrill Act in 1890 extended the system further. In the context of Jim Crow, required the creation of separate black institutions, which led directly to the founding of 19 historically black colleges and universities, including Tuskegee University and Alabama A&M. Today, 106 land-grant institutions operate across the country, including Texas A&M, Penn State, Ohio State, and the University of Illinois. However, even with that expansion, college remained primarily an elite pursuit. In 1940, approximately 4.6% of American adults held a bachelor's degree. Then came June 22, 1944. President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, the legislation that history would call the GI Bill. Of 16.1 million eligible World War II veterans, 7.8 million used the education and training benefits. Roughly 2.3 million attended college outright. By 1947, 49% of every student sitting in an American college college classroom was a veteran. The program produced 67,000 doctors, 91,000 scientists, 45,000 engineers, and 238,000 teachers. The VA estimated that the increased federal tax revenues generated by the GI Bill graduates paid for the entire program several times over. The share of Americans holding a bachelor's degree climbed from 4.6% in 1945 to 25% a half century later. By nearly every economic measure, the GI Bill remains one of the most effective public investments in American history. The problem is what the system built after that. The Higher Education Act of 1965, part of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, created the first federally guaranteed student loan program. Private banks issued the loans. The federal government backed them. Students could borrow for college without their families putting up any collateral whatsoever. In 1972, Congress created the Student Loan Marketing Association, which came to be known as Sallie Mae, as a government-sponsored enterprise designed to expand the flow of capital into the student loan market. That same year, Congress established the Pell Grant program, providing direct grants to lower-income students. Then in 1978, Congress passed the Middle Income Student Assistance Act, which eliminated all income requirements for student loans. Any American student could now borrow federal money for college regardless of what their family earned. Between 2006 and 2025, total outstanding student loan debt grew from $481 billion to $1.84 trillion, a near quadrupling in under 20 years. The debt explosion didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because prices exploded. And to understand why the prices exploded, the most useful starting point is a 1987 New York Times op-ed written by Secretary of Education William Bennett. Bennett argued that federal student aid was enabling colleges to raise their tuitions with effective impunity. Every dollar the government made available to students was a dollar the university could charge more for the education they provided. Over 25 independent empirical studies have since tested the claim. A 2015 Federal Reserve study found that for every $1 increase in subsidized student loan limits, tuition rose approximately 60 cents. The government was sending money to students, and the universities were just taking it. The Bennett hypothesis is not the only driver of the cost explosion, though, and the evidence for it is strongest at institutions with pricing power rather than at public universities constrained by political accountability. State funding cuts played an equally important role. Between 2000 and 2014, state funding per full-time student at public universities fell nearly 30% after inflation. By 2024, 22 states had not restored per-student public funding to where it stood before the 2008 financial crisis. Research estimates that for every $1,000 decrease in state funding per student, tuition rose approximately $257. As states retreated, universities raised prices to compensate, and the federally guaranteed loan system ensured there were always borrowers willing to take on the cost. And the money that universities collected through higher tuition didn't even flow primarily to classrooms. Between 1993 and 2007, the number of administrators per 100 students at leading universities increased 39%, while the number of faculty per 100 students grew only 18%. Spending on administration per student rose 61% in inflation-adjusted terms over the same period. The share of university budgets going toward actual instruction fell from 41% to 29% since 1980. At Yale, more administrators and managers, roughly 5,460, now work on campus than there are undergraduate students enrolled. At Washington University in St. Louis, the 17,019 full-time equivalent students are now outnumbered by 17,128 full-time equivalent non-instructional staff. At least 21 public university presidents earned over $1 million in 2023. Universities also spent heavily on amenities, locked in a competition to attract students through resort-style facilities that had nothing to do with the quality of instruction. Louisiana State University built an $85 million recreation center with a lazy river that spells LSU in script font, a 35-foot climbing wall, and a 40,000 square foot fitness facility. Texas Tech built a 2-acre water complex with a 700-foot lazy river. Ohio State overhauled its recreational facilities for $140 million. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that lower achieving students, the population most likely to be funding tuition through borrowed money, showed a stronger preference for luxury amenities than higher achieving students, who were typically on scholarships. The amenities were disproportionately funded by the students least positioned to pay for them, and the results for all of these converging forces were federal loan expansion, state funding cuts, and administrative bloat, and the amenities arms race. And that is a cost trajectory that defies comparison to almost any other consumer product in American life. Since 1963, public college tuition has increased 312% after adjusting for inflation. Private college tuition at the same time has only risen 259%. From 1989 to 2016, college costs grew 8 times faster than wages. In 1975, attending a public 4-year university cost approximately $2,149 per year in tuition and fees. By 2025-26, the same school costs roughly $11,950 in tuition and fees before room and board, which adds another $13,300 or so. Total annual cost of attendance at a public 4-year university now runs approximately $30,000 in-state. At a private nonprofit university, the figure approaches $63,000 per year. In 1970, a student working a summer minimum wage job could cover a full year's tuition at most public universities. It is no longer mathematically possible at any institution in the country. For several decades after the GI Bill, the system still made economic sense. College costs more, but it also paid more. The wage premium for a degree roughly doubled from approximately 40% in 1980 to about 79% by 2000, driven by a technology-intensive economy that placed increasing value on cognitive and technical skills. The logic was internally consistent, but what the system never built in was any mechanism for the cost to stop rising when the financial returns stopped growing, which is exactly what happened after 2000. Bureau of Labor Statistics data from 2024 shows that full-time workers with a bachelor's degree earned a median of $1,543 per week compared to $930 per week for workers with only a high school diploma. The unemployment rate for bachelor's degree holders runs at 2.5%, roughly half the 4.2% rate for high school graduates. Over a full 40-year career, Georgetown University's Center on Education and Workforce estimates that bachelor's degree holders earn approximately $1.2 million more than high school graduates. So that lifetime premium is large, consistent, and is held up through multiple economic cycles. And the recession data is also strong. During the 2008-2009 financial crisis, workers without a high school diploma hit 17.9% unemployment at the peak. High school graduates hit 10 to 11%, and workers with a bachelor's degree peaked at 5.3%. During COVID-19 in May of 2020, bachelor's degree holders were the only educational group in the United States that did not reach double-digit unemployment, and they were 6 times more likely than non-college educated workers to have the option to work remotely. The recession resilience case for a degree isn't theoretical. This has now been tested twice in 15 years and has held up both times. And the non-wage data is also concrete. The life expectancy gap between adults with a bachelor's degree or more and those without has grown from 2.6 years in 1992 to approximately 8 years by 2021. College-educated Americans are not just earning more, they are living substantially longer. The poverty rate among bachelor's degree holders is 3.5 times lower than among those with only a high school diploma. They are 4 times less likely to smoke, 5 times less likely to be incarcerated, and 40% of American homeowners hold at least a bachelor's degree. All of that is the case for college. The problem with presenting these statistics as a verdict on whether college is worth it is that they describe an average, and the average conceals a distribution so wide that is almost meaningless for any individual making the decision right now in 2026. This subject matter can be hard to digest, but for most Americans, their personal financial situation is the hardest subject to approach and manage, but with the Dollarwise budgeting app, you can finally take control, and since there's a free trial, you can see for yourself, get a full picture, automate your budget, get powerful insights, and set real goals that change your life. Download Dollarwise or go to dollarwise.com. Georgetown CEW data shows that the spread between the best paying and worst paying college majors accounts for $3.4 million in difference in lifetime earnings. That gap is larger than the gap between holding a bachelor's degree and not holding one. The Foundation of Research on Equal Opportunity has analyzed over 30,000 individual post-secondary programs and found that 23% of bachelor's degree programs produce a negative lifetime return on investment once tuition costs and foregone income are accounted for. A degree in computer science from a public university produces a lifetime return on investment of approximately $652,000. Engineering programs produce roughly $949,000. Nursing programs around $619,000, and finance and economics lands at around $549,000. UC Berkeley Anthropology produces a lifetime ROI of negative $57,987. UC Berkeley Classical and Ancient Studies negative $238,293. Columbia University's MFA Film program graduates students with a median debt load of $181,000 and median annual earnings below $30,000. 72.5% of drama and theater arts graduates across the country had not recouped their investment within 5 years of graduating, the single worst performing major in the FreeOp analysis. The underemployment data from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York breaks the picture down even further. As of their most recent reporting, 65.8% of criminal justice graduates are working jobs that do not require a college degree. 63.9% of performing arts graduates, 58.9% of fine arts graduates, and 58.1% of those with degrees in leisure and hospitality. The overall unemployment rate for graduates aged 22 to 27, people who just finished 4 years of college and entered the workforce, sits at 42.5%. A 2024 Strata Education Foundation study found that 52% of bachelor's graduates were unemployed 1 year after finishing their degree, and that 45% were still underemployed a decade later. 2/3 of those who were underemployed in their first job remained underemployed 5 years into their career. The college premium exists in the aggregate, but for enormous numbers of individual graduates, it is simply not materialized. There's also the break-even timeline that the headline earnings comparisons almost never include. A student who attends a public 4-year university in-state, borrows the average amount, and starts working at 22 begins their career approximately $120,000 in the hole relative to a high school graduate who went to work at 18. Even earning the median bachelor's degree wage of roughly $80,000 per year against the median high school wage of roughly $48,000, that college graduate does not surpass the high school graduate in cumulative lifetime earnings until approximately age 33, 11 years into their career. If the degree took 5 or 6 years, or came from a private school with $200,000 in debt, that break even extends into their late 30s, or it never arrives at all. The college wage premium has also stopped growing. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco noted in 2025 that the gap between college and high school wages has not meaningfully changed since 2000. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the premium was rising sharply, and taking on debt to capture that growing advantage made economic sense. Since 2000, the premium has been flat while tuition rose 40% in real terms. The financial return on a college degree has been slowly eroding for a quarter century, even as the sticker price has continued climbing. Inflation-adjusted starting salaries for bachelor's graduates increased only 5.9% total between 1960 and 2015, approximately 0.1% per year. The median inflation-adjusted graduate salary actually fell from $68,342 in 1984 to $64,840 in 2022. And there's also a structural dimension to the college premium that is rarely discussed directly: the role that credential inflation plays into generating it. In 1971, the Supreme Court issued its ruling in Griggs versus Duke Power, which effectively barred employers from using general aptitude tests to screen job applicants unless those tests were demonstratively tied to job performance. Employers needed a different filtering mechanism. The college degree became the default proxy, a signal of trainability, conscientiousness, and the demonstrated willingness to follow through on a multi-year structured commitment. Burning Glass Technologies analyzed the gap between what jobs actually required and what employers claim to require in job postings. They found that 65% of job postings for executive secretaries required a bachelor's degree, while only 19% of people actually doing that job held one. 66% of credit checker and clerk postings required degrees, but only 26% of working clerks had them. IT help desk postings required degrees 60% of the time, with identical skill requirements in postings that required degrees and those that did not. An estimated 6.2 million workers currently lose job opportunities to credential inflation, requirements that exist to narrow the applicant pool, not to ensure the hire can do the job. The college premium is partly a return on real skills and real knowledge. It is also, in substantial part, a return on owning a piece of paper that corporations have decided to use as a sorting tool. Brian Kaplan, an economist at George Mason University and the author of The Case Against Education, argues that somewhere between 30% and 80% of the college wage premium reflects what economists call signaling, the credential functioning as proof of pre-existing ability and conscientiousness rather than evidence of new knowledge gained during 4 years of study. Most economists place the signaling component in the 20 to 50% range rather than the 80% end. Even at the conservative estimate, society is spending a very large amount of money, $1.84 trillion in outstanding debt, hundreds of billions in annual government subsidies, and 4 to 6 years of young adults' most productive years to sort the workforce rather than meaningfully improve it. A system which the institution seeing the price has no financial stake in whether the student can afford to repay what they borrowed. The income-driven repayment programs, which allows borrowers to cap their monthly payments at 5% to 15% of their discretionary income, sounds humane until the math is worked through. Most borrowers enrolled in these programs have payments small enough that they do not cover the interest accruing on the loan every month. The balance grows instead of shrinking. 39% of federal borrowers are currently enrolled in income-driven repayment plans. 56% of all federal loan dollars are in those plans. The forgiveness window under the new repayment assistance plan signed into law in 2025 has been extended to 30 years, more than half of a typical working career. The delinquency data from early 2026 is the clearest signal that the system has reached a breaking point. About 1 in 4 borrowers with a payment currently due is delinquent. 7.9 million borrowers entered delinquency in the first 3 quarters of 2025 alone. Throughout 2025, a borrower was defaulting on a federal student loan every 9 seconds. And as of December 2025, 7.7 million borrowers hold $180 billion in defaulted federal loans, approximately the same count as in December 2019, before the pandemic paused temporarily masked the underlying distress. Delinquent borrowers saw their credit scores fall 57 points on average across the first 3 quarters of 2025. For 2 million borrowers who started 2024 with near prime or better credit, those scores fell below 100 points on average, from 680 to 580, dropping them into deep subprime territory and raising their lifetime borrowing costs for mortgages, auto loans, and everything else. The student debt conversation is also routinely distorted by a misunderstanding of who actually holds the debt. People with graduate degrees only represent 14% of the adult population, but carry 56% of all outstanding student loan debt. The Grad Plus loan program, created in 2006, had no borrowing limit. Graduate students can borrow up to the full annual cost of attendance with no income requirement at all. The result is that the debt crisis images, most prominent in media, the law student with $250,000, the film graduate with $300,000, represent a different population than the 44 million borrowers in aggregate. The typical federal borrower owes somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000. The people suffering most from the system are not elite graduate borrowers who will eventually earn their way out. They are students who enrolled, borrowed, and dropped out without finishing. Students who leave college without a degree face the worst possible outcomes: the debt of the educated without the credential or the earnings premium that comes with it. These borrowers default at a rate approximately 45% within 12 years of starting college. Students who drop out are 4 times more likely to default than those who graduate. 12 years after beginning college, non-completers still owe 84% of their original balance, compared to 58% for graduates who have been making payments for the same period. Yet only 41% of students at 4-year institutions graduate within 4 years. The 6-year graduation rate is 64%, meaning more than 1 in 3 students who start a 4-year degree program at the average institution do not finish within 6 years. At for-profit colleges, the 6-year graduation rate is 29%. The for-profit sector represents the most thorough, documented, and most consequential failure in American higher education. For-profit colleges enroll approximately 9% of all college students. They account for 44% of all student loan defaults and 65% of all federal fault complaints. The model was built on aggressively marketing to low-income, first-generation, and veteran students, with tuition prices calibrated not to the cost of instruction, but to the maximum available federal loan amount. Corinthian colleges operated in Everest, held, and YTech campus networks with approximately 110,000 students at peak enrollment. They marketed job placement rates of 90% or above, and many programs was under 30%. The 3-year loan default rate was 36%. The CEO earned $9.5 million in the 2 years before the collapse. When the Department of Education restricted Corinthians' access to federal funding in 2014, the company shut down virtually overnight, leaving students mid-semester with worthless credits and no recourse. ITT Technical Institute operated over 130 campuses with roughly 45,000 students. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau sued ITT for deploying private loan programs with interest rates up to 15% to lock students into debt they could not escape. When the department cut ITT's federal funding access in 2016, every campus closed simultaneously. $3.9 billion in loans were ultimately forgiven for 208,000 former students. The University of Phoenix enrolled 460,000 students at its 2010 peak and received over $24 billion in federal student aid during a period of active federal investigation. DeVry University was found by the Federal Trade Commission to have claimed 90% graduate employment rates when the actual figure was closer to 58%. The veteran exploitation dimension of the for-profit story deserves particular attention in this video, because the post-9/11 GI Bill expanded veterans' educational benefits substantially, making them high-value recruitment targets. A regulatory loophole called the 9-10 rule, requiring for-profit colleges to obtain no more than 90% of the revenue from federal sources, created a perverse incentive. GI Bill funds counted in the non-federal column. Institutions were financially motivated to actively recruit veterans not because they served them well, but because recruiting them helped avoid a federal revenue cap. Research documented that for-profit schools specifically deployed military imagery and language to reach veterans while delivering credentials the civilian labor market largely did not recognize. Beyond the for-profit collapse, there is grade inflation, which has been systematically hollowing out the academic credibility of a degree for decades. A college letter grade of A is now the single most common grade awarded at American universities, comprising approximately 43% of all grades, up from 15% in the 1960s. The average GPA across American universities has climbed from roughly 2.5 in 1960 to over 3.15 today. At Harvard, 66% of undergraduates earned A's in the 2024-2025 academic year. The median GPA for Harvard's class of 2025 is 3.83. At Yale, the percentage of grades that were A's rose from 10.4% in 1963 to 62% by 2012. Meanwhile, the total time that full-time students spent studying outside of the classroom fell from approximately 24 hours per week in 1961 to 14 hours per week by 2003, a 42% collapse in academic effort over 4 decades. The credential that is supposed to signal discipline and cognitive ability to employers is being devalued by the very institutions granting them, at the exact moment when more students than ever are taking on debt to obtain one. The parents of today's 18-year-olds went to college when real costs were a fraction of current levels, when the wage premium was growing rather than stagnant, and when the credential was far less diluted by grade inflation and the proliferation of degrees. Their personal experience of college as a reliable path to the middle class was accurate for the era in which they attended. But the system has changed substantially since then. The advice hasn't kept pace. A 2011 Pew survey found that 94% of American parents expected their child to attend college. The national school counselor-to-student ratio is 372 students per counselor, nearly 50% above the recommended ratio. With caseloads that large, counselors default to the simplest possible advice: apply to college. Gallup research on Gen Z confirms that conversations between schools and students are predominantly about college, and that only 1 in 3 Gen Z students reported that their school offered meaningful opportunities to learn about how to apply for a job or interview for one. A parent who would not allow their child to invest $100,000 in a business venture without reviewing the financials will routinely co-sign for $100,000 in student loans for a major that produces $38,000 per year in the median starting salary. Now, the parents aren't necessarily being evil, they're just acting on outdated data, and that needs to change. Take a moment and get some free, easy money. With a Chime checking account and my link, you can get $350 when you set up direct deposit and pair that with a nation-leading high-yield savings rate. There's literally no reason not to sign up right now. Chime.com/Caleb or link in the description below. An elevator mechanic in the United States earns a median annual wage of $106,580, according to 2024 Bureau of Labor Statistics data, with zero student loan debt. The median electrician earns between $65,000 and $85,000 per year. Electricians working union contracts in New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles earn $45 to $50 per hour in wages plus benefits. Master electricians and master plumbers in the top 10% of their field regularly clear over $105,000 per year. Self-employed trade contractors like plumbers, electricians, HVAC specialists who built their own client base regularly produce between $150,000 to $200,000 and $300,000 annually. The construction industry needs 499,000 new workers in 2026 alone. The United States will be an estimated 550,000 plumbers short by just 2027, and the manufacturing sector could see 1.9 million jobs go unfulfilled by 2030. For every 5 experienced tradespeople retiring right now, only 2 new workers are entering the field. Electricians face 9% projected job growth over the next decade, with 81,000 annual openings. HVAC technicians face 8% job growth, with 40,100 annual openings. Industrial machinery mechanics face 13% projected growth, the fastest of any skilled trade. A young person who enters a union electrician apprenticeship program at 18 earns approximately $120,000 to $170,000 in cumulative wages by 22, while simultaneously building 4 years of marketable trade experience and accumulating no debt whatsoever. A student at a private university over the same 4 years typically earns between $0 and $10,000 in part-time work while accumulating $30,000 or more in student loans. The net financial difference between those two 22-year-olds before either has taken a single full-time professional job is somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 in the tradesperson's favor. And the tradesperson is already earning journeyman wages while the graduate is still scanning job listings. Union retirement contributions in the trades average $4.85 per hour in employer contributions. Compare that to $1.12 per hour for non-union workers in comparable roles. The trades worker is building toward a pension while the college graduate is paying down a loan. The stigma surrounding this path is real and also increasingly disconnected from economic reality. A McKinsey survey found that 74% of young Americans perceive a stigma against vocational school relative to a 4-year college. The college or bust norm crystallized in the 1990s and 2000s as manufacturing declined and the knowledge economy narrative took hold across politics, media, and education policy. High school vocational programs were systematically defunded and culturally stigmatized during this period. Parents who went to college when it cost $5,000 per year and reliably delivered a middle-class career have passed that memory down as a universal prescription for their children. In a world where the same credential now costs up to $250,000 and delivers a middle-class career only under specific conditions. And the data shows the correction is beginning. Trade school enrollment rose 16% in 2023, reaching its highest level since 2018. Vocational certificate enrollment at community colleges is up 28.3% since fall of 2021. The demographic data suggests the cultural shift is real, but it is moving against decades of institutional inertia. Community college also represents a genuine underutilized middle path. The average annual in-district tuition at a community college is approximately $3,990 compared to $11,260 at a 4-year university in-state. The 2+2 pathway, 2 years at community college and transfer to a 4-year institution, can save $50,000 to $80,000 in total education costs while producing equivalent degree outcomes in most fields. Georgetown CEW research consistently finds that associate's degrees in STEM fields produce median earnings around $60,000, higher than bachelor's degrees in humanities, arts, or psychology. The problem with the community college pathway is completion. Only 16% of community college students who intend to transfer ultimately earn a bachelor's degree within 6 years. The pathway works financially, but getting through it is genuinely difficult. Beyond trades and community college, professional certifications are producing salary outcomes that rival graduate degrees at a small fraction of the cost. A project management professional certification, the PMP, costs between $2,500 and $3,300 total and produces average salaries of approximately $120,000 to $122,000. An AWS Solutions Architect certification at the professional level costs $300 to $500 and produces average salaries between $155,000 and $170,000. A CISSP cybersecurity certification costing around $700 produces median salaries over $131,000. The PMP generates earnings roughly equivalent to a master's in business administration from a mid-tier school at approximately 1% of the cost and in a fraction of the time. This is the part of the conversation about college that the institutional infrastructure surrounding American education has very little financial incentive to ever have with incoming students. By 2024, only 25% of all American adults said a 4-year degree was extremely or very important for getting a well-paying job. 49% said a degree was less important today than it was 20 years ago. 47% said college was worth it only if a student could avoid loans entirely. Only 22% said it was worth it even with debt. Republican confidence in 4-year colleges has fallen from 56% in 2015 to just 26% in 2025. Democratic confidence has dropped from 68% to 61% over the same period. 68% of all Americans across both political parties now say higher education is headed in the wrong direction. There's also a structural demographic problem the industry has not solved. High school graduates in the United States peaked at approximately 3.9 million in 2025 and are projected by the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education to decline by 13% over the following 15 years. The Northeast and Midwest are projected to lose more than 15% of their traditional college-age population by 2041. Since 2016, more than 120 American colleges have closed or merged. The demographic cliff is not a future event. It has already started. The institutions that have been competing on amenities and administrative staff count are now looking at a shrinking pool of potential students and a much more unforgiving financial environment. Artificial intelligence is creating a new threat on top of all of this. Every previous wave of automation hit manufacturing and routine physical labor first. AI is different. It is specifically capable in the entry-level cognitive tasks that a 4-year degree was supposed to guarantee access to, like legal research, financial analysis, basic coding, administrative work, paralegal functions, customer service, and data processing. Goldman Sachs estimated that AI could displace up to 11 million U.S. workers if widely adopted. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei projected that AI could eliminate roughly half of all entry-level white-collar positions within 5 years. U.S. programmer employment fell 27.5% between 2023 and 2025. Entry-level job postings declined approximately 35% between January 2023 and mid-2025. Only 30% of the class of 2025 secured full-time employment in their field, down from 41% for the previous graduating class. Plumbers, electricians, HVAC technicians, and construction managers are largely insulated from this wave. Their work requires physical presence, manual precision, and on-site problem solving that current AI cannot perform. The trades aren't immune to every form of automation though, but they are dramatically more resilient to the current wave than the white-collar entry-level market is. So, what does the data actually support? Engineering, computer science, nursing, finance, and accounting at an in-state public university with debt controlled below the expected first-year salary with a realistic plan for completing the degree in 4 years remains one of the best financial investments available to an 18-year-old in the United States. The lifetime return on investment in those fields runs between $500,000 and $949,000. Unemployment rates in those fields are historically low. Career floors are high, and the math works clearly and consistently. Where a performing arts degree at a for-profit art school with $80,000 in private student loans and a 29% institutional graduation rate is clearly not an investment by any financial definition. And neither is a fine arts degree from a private school with $130,000 in debt, a 63.9% underemployment rate in the field, and a lifetime return on investment that FREOP puts in negative territory for many programs. The gap between those two outcomes, engineering at a state school school versus fine arts at a private school isn't even close to marginal. It's the difference between retiring wealthy and spending your 30s in a debt spiral that your salary will never outrun. The GI Bill worked as well as it did because it sent specific people to college with specific career goals at costs the economy could sustain at a moment when the labor market was hungry for precisely what those colleges produced. The system that followed, built on open-ended federal lending, no institutional price discipline, and a cultural mandate that every 18-year-old must enroll regardless of what they plan to study or how much they must borrow, produced something very different. It produced $1.84 trillion in outstanding debt, 42.5% underemployment among recent graduates, a delinquency rate approaching 25%, and 23% of bachelor's degree programs that would have left their graduates financially better off if they had never enrolled. The college wage premium was real. The recession resilience is real. The life expectancy gap is also real, and none of that is a dispute. But what is equally real is that a tradesperson who completes an apprenticeship at 22 with $170,000 in accumulated wages and no debt is, by every objective financial metric, ahead of the psychology graduate starting at $40,000 a year with $35,000 in loans. What is real is that the most dangerous piece of advice in American education is the one that has been given to millions of teenagers for 4 decades. Go to any college, study anything, and figure it out later. The data doesn't support that advice anymore. And honestly, never did. The only difference now is that the cost of getting that advice wrong is far too large to ignore. The real question has always been whether this specific degree at this specific school at this specific price is worth it for this specific person against the realistic alternatives available to reach their specific goals. The calculation isn't complicated. It just requires doing the math without the weight of 4 decades of cultural doctrine telling you the answers before you start. See you in the next one. I'll be candid. Front Page loses money. The cost of research, audio editing, video editing, and everything else that goes into this project is substantial. I believe the neutral and factual perspective we bring to these topics are important in today's culture of endless misinformation for political or financial gain. If you support the journalism we do here, please consider clicking the join button or the channel membership link in the description or pinned comment below and join in with everyone else supporting this project. Every single supporter makes a difference and helps us continue Front Page. Click join or the link in the description or pinned comment below. Thank you.